Okay, hello. I'm going to start a very rough draft here. And every so often, I'm going to film myself cooking my recipes. And since the soup is one that I do quite often, I'm going to show you guys this one. Ingredients change. I've told you guys this before. My ingredients change from time to time, but the idea behind the soup stays the same always. So I'm just going to run through it. I hope that this works. I'm also going to take a shower while the soup is cooking. So I'm going to come back with wet hair and finish it up. But first and foremost, the things that you're going to need. So I like bone broth in my soup always. My favorite brand is Kettle and Fire. For this one, I'm trying a new flavor. It is mushroom chicken bone broth. I get 2 of them because you're going to want to make, this is going to make 4 servings. If you're just going to make 2 servings, you can use just 1, but I like a little bit more broth because I do put a lot of stuff in my soup. So 2 containers of Kettle and Fire. There are definitely more affordable bone broths on the market. So if that is the choice that you make, that is totally fine. Okay, 2 containers there, or 1 big container of bone broth. 2 chicken breasts. I normally like to go for about 1.5 pounds. I like my protein in my soups. I like my proteins to be I can't speak tonight. I like my soup to be very protein dense. So I get 1.5 pounds of chicken breast. Of course, you can alter this to make it fit your macros a little bit better. Next thing I have is orzo. I also, like you guys have seen, I use tortellini a lot. I use ravioli from time to time. I feel like I had a lot of cheese with Thanksgiving, so I'm just gonna stick to orzo and not get the cheesy tortellini ravioli. Okay. Then for the vegetables that are gonna go into the soup, I've got a big bushel of kale. We don't use all of this. I'll show you, once we get into it, what we use. Broccoli, about a little, I think they call these, is it a floret or is it a head? Head of broccoli? I don't know. One of those things. Not fancy here. And then a bundle of green onions, a thing of white mushrooms, doesn't have to be fancy on your selection there, and then some cheese. You can use whatever cheese you want. You can also skip out on cheese if you're not a cheese person. I also haven't grabbed this before, but it's a shaved Italian blend from Publix. It's Parmesan, Romano, and Asiago cheese, and I like it shaved. I think that's just the best cheese, and I have to be careful of buying it or else I'll sit here and just eat it right out of the container. But either Parmesan or I'm gonna try this one today and see how it goes. As for seasonings, you can get really creative here. I kind of stick to somewhat basic stuff when it comes to soup because I don't want it to be so overpowering unless I'm trying to make it that way, if that makes sense. So I'm just gonna use coarse black pepper, salt. This is garlic powder. You can also do garlic salt instead of doing salt. You can just, or in garlic powder combined, you can just do garlic salt, but I've got garlic powder because I'm out of garlic salt. Onion powder, and then I like it to have a little bit of a kick, like the chicken to be a little blackened almost, so I use Old Bay in pretty much everything. Sometimes I'll use chili powder if I want more of a spice, and I actually have a chili crunch in the fridge that I'm considering using, but I haven't decided yet. Okay, so first things first, you're gonna need a big pan, a big pot here for your soup. And what we're gonna do is we're going to put this onto our oven. We're gonna add 2 tablespoons of olive oil into that. We're gonna set the stove on to medium to high heat to start it off. And then we're gonna load the chicken in with all of these seasonings. I like a lot of seasoning. I season very generously. Like, it's just so good when you use more seasoning. And don't be afraid to use more seasoning. Seasonings have some of the highest micronutrients and antioxidants compared to fruits and vegetables even. So be generous with your seasonings. It's always great. So once we load that in with the chicken and 2 tablespoons of olive oil, we're gonna cook the chicken until it's mostly browned. All right, so let's do it. Okay, so again, about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Normally I would measure this out, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to eyeball it. Don't do what I did if you're counting your macros, okay? 2 tablespoons of olive oil there. Again, I'm going to load. I'm not scared of my meat here, so if you think this is disgusting, I'm sorry. My hands are clean. They're ready to go. 2 chicken breasts go right here. My heat is on an 8 right now. I like to keep it right in between like an 8 and a 9 on my stove top. And I'm just gonna kind of soak that around into the olive oil. You can use tongs here if you get grossed out by chicken. I'm gonna go wash my hands before I touch anything else. Okay, chicken is loaded in. Again, I'm gonna be super generous when it comes to seasoning these bad boys. All right, I really load my breast, so I'm going to start with just on the top side first, loading it up with all of these seasonings. So black pepper, garlic powder. You can also use minced garlic instead, but I just really didn't feel like it. Feel like getting that at the store or doing it myself, so I'm just using the garlic powder. Old Bay seasoning, again, being super generous with this here. Salt. Salt is not the devil, it's very good for you. And then onion powder on top. Again, you can do diced onions here instead too. I just didn't feel like it, honestly. Okay, so there's the top, what it looks like. I'm gonna let that cook until it's browned on the bottom, and then I'm going to flip them over with tongs, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, season it the same way, and let it cook until brown. Okay, I'm sorry if this is loud cooking next to me. We will figure this out. This is the rough draft, the first try. Okay, so my chicken is getting mostly brown on the bottom side. I'm going to flip it over now using my tongs. And you can kind of see how it's just like the slightest bit golden there on the bottom. So the best thing about soup is you don't have to cook your chicken all the way through, because when you load your broth in and put the lid on top, it's going to cook it all the way through over time. So I'm going to season these again, same seasonings that I did before, the black pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, salt, and Old Bay. Okay, both sides of the chicken are loaded with seasonings. I'm letting it again brown on the side that I just flipped it on. This is a process that takes maybe 5 to 7 minutes, not very long. Okay, my chicken has browned on both sides. I'm turning the heat down to medium to high heat, closer to that medium range. So about a 5 or a 6, maybe a 7 there on your stove. All stoves are gonna be a little bit different. Mine is a little bit of an older stove here, but I'm just gonna turn that heat down. I'm actually gonna flip it one more time. So I'm flipping it back to the original side of my chicken. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my bone broth in. So these are a little bit more difficult. They're not the screw top. You got to lift them on both sides. And sometimes I have to cut the top of it. Yeah, got to cut the top. So cutting the top here. These spill out really easily, so I'm just going to set it right over as I cut. And I already spilled. It just happens when you're in the kitchen. We're not perfect over here. This is not Martha Stewart. And then I'm gonna add that other one in. All right, this is how it should look. The broth is in. The heat has been turned down just a little bit for the meantime. I'm actually just gonna crank it up one more to 7. And I'm gonna let this chicken cook. I'm gonna put the lid back on top of the pot here. So make sure that your pot has a lid. And we're gonna let that all cook. And while this cooks, I'm going to chop up veggies. All right, making sure that your veggies are rinsed and our flyaways are back. Grabbing my favorite knife here. So what I like to do is I add the harder veggies into the soup first. So things like if I do carrots, broccoli, celery, things that have a harder consistency, because those take a little bit longer to cook. So I'm gonna chop up the broccoli into smaller bite-sized pieces. I don't like no chunks, no huge chunks in my soup. I like little chunks, not huge chunks. So I'm gonna cut this up pretty finely. So what I'm gonna start doing is I'm just gonna chop the bottom off here of the broccoli. I don't need all of this broccoli. I don't think, we're gonna see here. But again, I'm just gonna chop it up a little bit smaller. So I want them to be like bite-sized pieces there. If you like them a little bit bigger, that's fine. And I'm just gonna go ahead and use the whole stalk because I really like broccoli. So I will even eat the bottom here in my soup. I'll just chop off that rougher edge there at the bottom, but I will still use this for my soup or for whatever else I eat because I really do like the whole piece of broccoli. As I chop that, I'm just gonna throw it right into the pot. So again, I'm starting with these veggies that are a little bit harder and will take a little bit longer to cook. If you like your veggies to be more crunchy, then you can throw them in a little bit later. But I really like my veggies to cook with my chicken for like 40 minutes. Again, I just like them to be a little bit softer versus a little bit harder. You also don't have to put your veggies into the soup as you cut them like I'm doing. I'm not sure why I'm doing this. I normally cut everything first and then I'll throw it in, but whatever, you get it. All right, I'm gonna finish cutting the broccoli. And I'm doing probably about 2 cups total of broccoli. All right, for my kale, again, making sure it's rinsed. I normally grab 3 pretty healthy sizes of green kale. I honestly prefer black kale in soups, but it's really hard to find in the grocery store, so green kale will do. This is another one I like to be softer, so all of my veggies for today I'm putting in earlier into my soup so that they will get nice and soft by the end. So the easiest way for me to cut kale is I honestly fold it in half, and then I cut right along the stem so that it's really easy to just peel and rip the stem and then throw the stem away. I'm not eating the kale stem. So you've got longer pieces of kale there. You can also honestly just rip it. It's really easy just to rip right from the stem. You can do it whatever way you prefer there. So either way, I just try to get most of the big pieces right off the kale stem. One more time here. You can rip it, you can cut it, do it however you want. It's probably pretty dangerous that I'm holding my knife like this, but whatever, don't come for me. All right, so we've got our pile of kale here. Again, I'm somebody that really likes greens. I really like kale. If you don't love kale, then obviously you can substitute with something else. Maybe you get spinach. Maybe you don't love greens, so you get something like carrots. Any vegetable will do. The soup is your oyster. You can make it whatever you want. When I have my bundle of kale here, what I'm gonna do is I'm kind of just gonna bunch it into a ball, make sure that my fingers are out of the way, and I'm just going to cut smaller pieces here, getting those kale pieces into bite-sized pieces, because the last thing that I want is a huge ass piece of kale to swallow. Once I've done it short ways here, then I'm gonna take it long ways, and I'm just gonna cut across the kale. There's probably a better way to do this. I'm not a professional chef, but I just find that this way is the easiest. I like convenience. I like, you know, consistency, convenience, whatever it is. So I like to move a little bit faster here in the kitchen. So I'm just gonna cut back and forth there. This is a huge serving of kale. Again, I really like kale. So this is probably about 3 cups. Again, I used 3 bigger stalks of kale there. And then I'm gonna throw this right into the soup on top of the broccoli and the chicken and the broth. Okay, last thing I'm gonna put in for now is the mushrooms. My soup is boiling a little bit, so what I'm gonna do is just turn it down a notch. So you kind of wanna watch that in the beginning to see if it starts to boil, because you want it to bubble a little bit, but you don't want it to be so hot that it's boiling. Okay, so I got about 6 mushrooms out. These, I'm sure there's a better way to cut them too, but I honestly just cut them right down the middle, and then I just try to cut them into bite-sized pieces. It's not pretty, I don't care. It doesn't have to be symmetrical. This is all going into one place. It doesn't bother me. So again, I'm cutting these down into bite-sized pieces, and then I will be throwing them into the soup. If you want to get fancy with it and cut it into slices like they do in the little miso soups and whatnot, be my guest. I really just don't care that much. All right, got about 2 cups of mushrooms here, or about 6 mushrooms. Chopped into bite-sized pieces. I'm gonna throw them all into the soup. And you can see, all right, so you can see that everything so far is in the soup. I wish I had my tripod for a better view, but I can't find it. What I'm gonna do is just stir this together, make sure that everything is in the broth, or it's at least touching the broth here. I'm gonna put the lid back on it, and I'm actually gonna turn it down even more, just a little bit, to about between a 4 and a 5, because now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the timer for 30 minutes. It's gonna simmer here for 30 minutes. I'm gonna go grab a shower. When I come back from my shower, we will be taking the chicken out and shredding it, and then we'll add the other stuff into the soup. Okay, we're back. You can see I fully showered. That was the dryer. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna pull the chicken out of the soup, and I'm going to put it here on my cutting board, and then I'm going to put normally about a 1/2 cup, maybe 3/4 a cup of orzo into the soup. I don't like a ton of orzo into my soup. I just like it for a little extra carbohydrate, so I'm adding a little calorie. Like I said earlier, I like to make these a little bit of a higher calorie soup. So taking the lid off here, watch the top of your handle. It might be pretty warm, and then watch your soup when you pull it off, because it's definitely going to be warm. I'm going to fish my chicken breasts out of here. They should be cooked all the way through. You want to see if they're nice and soft. So I'll know that when I start cutting in between the chicken, when I start shredding the chicken. But I would just want to make sure they're nice and soft. So I'm going to bring my cutting board over, take the chicken out. I'll put it right on top of my cutting board. Beautiful. They look gorgeous. I'm going to push those over to the side for a minute. Again, we're making a mess over here. That's just how it goes. I am going to definitely measure this out because I am not always positive what a cup of orzo looks like. So I'm actually going to take 2/3 a cup and do 2/3 a cup of orzo. Oh my God, did you guys just see all that? We spill in here. So 2/3 cup of orzo. I'm actually not even gonna fill that all the way up because that just seems like a lot of orzo. So it really is almost 2/3 a cup of orzo, and I'm just gonna sprinkle that into the soup. Again, you can use more orzo if you like. Do whatever you want. I just don't like a ton in there. I'm gonna clean this up. Okay, I added the orzo to the soup. I turned it back up just a little bit. We are now about 50 minutes into making this. This does take about 60 to 75 minutes, but the best part about it is that you can just leave it while it cooks for that 30 minutes, run and do whatever you need to, or you can sit and watch over it. So the easiest way to do your chicken, to shred your chicken, grab 2 forks and you're literally just going to pull the chicken apart using your 2 forks. Okay, you can also just do this with 1 fork and hold it down with a knife, but I just find it's a lot easier to do it with 2 forks. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just pulling it apart mostly because what I'm gonna do at the end is I'll go back up in and I'll cut the chicken into pieces with my knife. So again, I'm just like shredding the chicken. I'm taking it, holding it with 1 fork, and I'm pulling it with the other fork. This is the easiest way to shred chicken. If you do it another way, why? And if it's faster, tell me about it. So I'm gonna shred this real quick. Okay, so this chicken is shredded, but you'll see it's still in fairly big chunks. So kind of like I did with the kale, I'm just gonna go over the top of it. You can grab a bigger knife if you want. And I'm just gonna cut into it, making smaller shredded pieces. Again, I just find that this is the fastest way. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time shredding chicken, so it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just cutting it into the top here. Kind of feel like Kendall Jenner now that I'm showing you guys how I actually cut things, like the whole trend of how she doesn't know how to cut things with a knife. I kind of feel like that right now, but I don't cut myself and it gets the job done. So again, making these smaller pieces, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this right back into the soup. Again, I turned that soup up just a little bit more. I turned it right back to a 5. Okay, those look like pretty good pieces. Now I'm gonna put this right back in the soup. Okay, so I added the chicken back in, I stirred it around, and now the soup is in there. I'm probably gonna leave it in there for about another 5 to 8 minutes. I'll look at the orzo and make sure that it's soft. So I just cleaned off my cutting board a little bit. I'm not huge on washing the cutting board in between doing things. Like again, this is all cooked, it's going the same place, so I don't really care that much. Now I'm gonna take my green onions and I am going to make sure they're washed, and then I'm going to chop them. Okay, green onions have been washed. I'm going to chop them into fine pieces here. I'm, again, somebody that likes a really generous servings here of green onions. I think green onions are the best thing to ever grace this planet. And fun fact, if you didn't know, you can grow them by yourself. So all you have to do is take the end of this from the bottom. I'm going to cut it pretty almost down to the bottom, and you just stick that into a glass of water and make sure it has some sunlight, and it will grow more green onions. So the more you know. So again, I'm chopping this. I'm just going to go ahead and use all of them. Again, I love green onions. This is going into my entire soup. So once I chop these, I'll throw them right on top when there's about a minute left to cook the soup. Green onions are chopped. I'm putting them into some water, and I'm going to put it on the windowsill. And then I'll grow my own green onions. Okay, you can see it steaming. I just gave myself about 1/4 of what was in my pot. You really have to just use your best judgment when it comes to planning out your recipes and tracking your macros, if that's how you're doing it. Use your best judgment onto about what 1/4 is. You can also just separate it ahead of time if you'd like into fourths, into like little containers that you can go ahead and put into the fridge. But this is how it looks. Nice hearty soup. while I eat, I normally just like to let the soup continue to cook on low, like the lowest setting for the remainder of time while I eat, just to continue to like soak up in those flavors. I also am like ready to eat, so I'm too lazy to pull it off the stove. I'm going to give myself 1 serving. Again, I would be normally weighing this out or putting it into a cup, but rough draft here for the sake of time. 1 serving of that shaved cheese right on top. I was going to make it spicy. I decided I'm not really in the mood for spicy food right now. So I'm going to leave the spice out. But my favorite thing to add to soup that is extremely spicy, and I say that like I love spice and it's very spicy, is about a tablespoon or maybe half a tablespoon. I normally do half a tablespoon per serving of this Momofuku or Momofuku chili crunch. I think I found it at Publix, but that makes it really spicy. It's super good in soup. I'm just not in the mood tonight, but that's how you do it. I'm gonna gobble this up and probably crawl into bed. I'll get the numbers programmed so that you guys have it, but on average my soups are, again, pretty higher calorie, higher protein, normally between like the 500 to 800 calorie range, and normally like 50 grams of protein, which is perfect. But hope you guys had fun. I loved this. I'll do it some more. Rough draft. Let me know how you liked it or what I can do to make this, you know, more efficient or answer more questions.
Also, okay, last note, if you don't have soup plate bowls that are like plates, but they have sides, you need to get them. Okay, bye.